How did crypto bros become such a powerful political force?
They should not be subject to the same regulation as banks.
Why is the right considered today's counterculture?
They're all way better than this!
When did clean energy become too lip-coated?
Confront the climate crisis.
Just some of the stuff we explore in the Culture Lab, the marvelous mad science of how the zeitgeist shapes our politics. Hosted by data scientists and pollsters, Kyla Van Ellenfitch and Gabe DeRoche. Join every week as they bring together data, their own insights, and a special guest to put a different loaded question under the microscope. Culture Lab, a brand new podcast from Air Quotes Media, creators of Curse of Politics, The Herle Burly, and Hotel Pacifico. Subscribe now.
Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. Fred DeLorey is here, making his third appearance on this show, which means he now joins last week's guest, Jason Kenney, on a very short list of official friends of the pod. So, as the legendary Bob Barker used to say, tell him what he's won, Johnny. Well, Fred, how about a t-shirt and a premium hot beverage mug with my heavily photoshopped face plastered on the front?
Well, I can't wait to see that.
There you go. For those who may not know, Fred was the national campaign manager for Erin O'Toole in 2021. Before that, the director of field operations for Ontario Premier Doug Ford, and a former director of political operations for Stephen Harper, as well as director of comms and national spokesperson. Today, he's chair and chief strategy officer at NorthStar Public Affairs. So with that kind of CCV, conservative curriculum vitae, we're going to get an operative perspective on how the party should be navigating the next 12 months or so, a potential election, paths to victory, referendums in Alberta and Quebec, lots more. Fred DeLorey, welcome back to the Herle Burly. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, well, it's been a busy couple of weeks for Conservatives. I mean, you have had a lot on your plate. You've been out in PEI helping somebody get elected. You were in Ottawa to celebrate the Harper portrait unveiling and the 20th anniversary of the 2006 win, and you were out in Calgary at the official party convention. So who better to ask, what's the mood of the Conservative Party these days?
Well, it's I was at technically three different political or conservative events in terms of the parties, the PEI Tories, the Nova Scotia Tories, and the federal Tories. The mood is, going into convention, there was what was that, 10 days ago now, or 11, 12, I don't know, it feels a lifetime in some ways. The mood then was there was a lot of excitement in Calgary. I'd say the vibe was positive. The people felt the leader was on the right track, and they gave him an overwhelming vote of confidence in that regard with 87.4%.
Yep.
There was, and I was one of the people that raised, I wish in his speech he kind of took on the big issue more, the fight of Trump and tariffs.
Yep.
Jason Kenney, who's been on your show, said, similar things. And I would agree with a lot of that. I think that's, we need to be on that battlefield and on that battleground. But there's still so many Canadians that are really focused on affordability and crime, and Poilievre is the leader on that front. So it's, in that regard, I'd say coming out of convention, there's optimism, but there's also fear. If there's an election soon, there's a lot of understanding that if the election happens in the next few months, it'll be incredibly difficult for Conservatives, unless, of course, as volatile as things are, things get turned upside down, which can happen. I will say just quickly to pivot to the provincial parties that I was, the Ontario PC convention, I didn't get a chance to go to because it was the same time as Calgary, but I was at the Nova Scotia one and then the PEI leadership and the provincial parties, and the parties remain incredibly strong across the country. They're in government in both those places and Ontario. And I think, it's interesting when we talk about the struggles the Conservative Party of Canada has in winning, but you look at the provincial level, we are, the vast majority of Canadians are governed by Conservatives at the provincial level. So it's a funny contrast.
It is, but historically, it kind of works that way, I think, to my observation, Fred, in that after 11 years of federal Liberal government, it would be highly unusual if most of the provinces weren't provincially conservative. I remember after the Mulroney wiped out the Liberals federally in 1984, that it was I think, in 85, when David Peterson in Ontario and Frank McKenna in New Brunswick popped up, and that's when the sort of cycle renewed itself. But I would imagine the tone is different in different places. And I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on the Conservatives because I really want to talk to you about the Liberals. But I do have a question, and I think it's something that might have come up more at the Harper events than at the official convention. Official conventions are full of real sort of committed, enthusiastic activists of the current moment who want to get out there and fight, etc. The Harper gatherings were older people who sort of been through the battles and looking back on things. So I'm curious. The Conservative Party of Canada was created specifically out of two parties that it felt neither party could win, and that Conservatives needed to come together in a national party, abandon Reform and Alliance and abandon the old PC thing, and come together in a new formulation in order to win elections. And it was successful pretty quickly. But if we look back on it now, there have been 8 elections since the formation of the Conservative Party at the federal level. Conservatives have won 3 of them, 2 minorities and a majority in, I think we would both agree, somewhat unusual circumstances. The majority was 1. So when people get together at the Harper event when they go to Zoe's in groups of 6 and 8 and have some drinks, do they ponder this question? Did it work? Is this thing built to win?
Well, I mean, you got to keep in mind, since the party was created, every single election that's contested, it's competed in. It was competing for government in all of those since its birth in 2003. So that right there, I think, it is working. Like Poilievre and his Conservatives were only 20 some seats away or 30 seats away from beating the Liberals in the last election. Like it was much, much closer. And the popular vote was very, very tight. And we won the popular vote in a lot of the last number of elections, last 5 or so. I think we won 3 of 5. So the party, the fundamentals are there, I think, to win. It is a party that can compete and do so. But to go back to, what Harper built together, you also have to understand, how did it split apart? The old PC coalition that existed in this country at one time was the founding party of this country.
Yep.
Conservatism in Canada is very, very challenging to keep together. There's so many different types of Conservatives, and those are sometimes they manifest into different political parties. And when that happens, you get a major schism. But right now you can identify a lot of different types of Conservatives, and they're all regional based as well. We're a country of regions. We're the second largest country in the world, and our population is a string across the bottom of it, with mountains that divide us, with ocean on some of us, and massive forests and prairies, and Quebec cultural differences. Like, we're such a diverse country politically, and the conservatism is diverse. And when you do that, you get these different pockets that don't always agree with the same thing. And some types of conservative may work very well in one part of the country and not at all in the other. And that's what I think is one of the almighty big challenges the Conservative Party has in elections, is that. And of course, the other big challenge the Conservative Party has is the Liberal Party, and having a party, and I don't mean to make it sound like I'm slagging it, I kind of envy it in many ways, but the Liberal Party, the fact that you can go from Justin Trudeau one day and Mark Carney the next and have no one blink an eye says a lot about how that party's values and its core beliefs are just win, which is very different than a Conservative Party.
So consider this ad a sort of bridge between the impressive sovereign AI feature-driven messages I've been downloading here on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and why a strong, true, real digital sovereignty strategy is so important in the first place, and how the government's Buy Canadian policy fits into this. We'll be talking about that for the next few weeks. And, editor's note, the adjectives strong, true, and real were chosen purposefully. All right, do we have our bearings then? Good. Here's the context and the crux of it. Our once predictable trading relationships are undergoing seismic change. We know this. Man, do we know it. So, among other adaptations, Canada needs to invest in itself, shore up or build domestic capacity from the ground up, with Canadian partners first. That's why the Feds introduced the Buy Canadian policy, designed to help make our economy stronger, more resilient to global shocks, and support our own workers and businesses. It applies to all kinds of sectors, including Canadian technology, the biggest emerging market of which is AI. That's it for the context. Here's the crux. With the word sovereignty occupying so much mind space, there needs to be ironclad alignment on what precisely qualifies as truly Canadian, a robust definition, and a set of enforced standards. Consistency is key, particularly when it comes to AI infrastructure. I'll have more on that next week. But in the meantime, know this. TELUS is proud to be an owned and controlled, end-to-end, sovereign Canadian brand. Their AI factory built upon a foundation of security, sovereignty, and Canadian values. How is it different? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, the Liberal Party wakes up in the mornings, how do we win the election? The Conservative Party is how do we make sure our views are the right views that we want to govern in? Those are very different strategies and outlooks. And the NDP would be aligned with the Conservatives and that on the other side of the spectrum. But again, like we saw all the messages on carbon tax on how the world is on fire, we need a carbon tax. And then all of a sudden, I see the same MPs taking selfies at gas pumps saying, hey, hooray, the carbon tax is gone, and gas prices are coming down because the leader changed. I don't know of any other party that can do that than the Liberal Party.
Right. Well, and it can't always be done in the Liberal Party either. But I think in this circumstance, first of all, I'm taking your general point. I'm not disputing your general point. It's not an ideological party in the way the Conservatives party is, and that's why, for instance, I've always said leaderships are much easier to predict in the Liberal Party because they go to the person most likely to win an election, invariably. But you alluded to the different tribes within the Conservative Party, and one of the things I think you are uniquely qualified to talk to me about is I've become quite obsessed with the divide between rural and urban society and how different they are and what their different perspectives are. And in most of the country, that manifests itself in very different political outcomes, right? Liberals tend to dominate in large cities. Conservatives dominate in rural areas, right? Atlantic Canada is different. The Liberal Party gets the votes or is competitive for the votes of people who live in rural Atlantic Canada. Why is that different?
Um, yeah, I would say we're we're rural, but we're smaller. Our geographic areas are smaller and our populations are smaller. So it's a little bit different. And I grew up in a liberal town. It was Antigonish is where I'm from, and that's liberal and Catholic. And the Pictou to the west of us across the mountains was Protestant and conservative. So there's this weird religious divide as well, very much cemented in it. And no matter what, liberals voted red and the Protestants voted blue. So there's just there's a different history there, I think. And if you look at it if you look across the country, it's the region where the Liberals are strongest provincially as well. They're still, I know in Nova Scotia they just got wiped out, but in New Brunswick they're in government now. It's the lone government in all of Canada is Liberal. So I think we also have a difference, I would say, politically, where the Liberal Party and the PC parties are very centrist. The PC party is a little bit more, I would say, to the middle than it is to the right anywhere else. And federally, I think that the region, that's just where they are. So a more right-wing Conservative Party of Canada, it is hard to compete in those areas that just tend to have very centrist provincial representation. And it's a little bit out of their comfort zone at times to go conservative. Now, it's not always the case. Stephen Harper, when he got his majority in 11, we won the majority of the seats in the Maritimes. We had 13 of 25 seats. So it is, we can do it. It happens, but it takes.
But the rural residents don't seem as alienated. from the rest of the country. I mean, in Atlantic Canada, although they certainly made their presence known about the carbon tax, etc., when on home heating fuel. I think it's interesting that that's a more moderate form of rural voter in
Right.
Atlantic Canada. I'd love to understand it a little bit more, as part of my effort to understand how we can knit urban and rural Canada back together a little bit, because that's a divide I've only seen grow in my life.
Yeah, and like looking at the Nova Scotia results for their election last year provincially, the Conservatives got the most seats in history for any party, and the Liberals got knocked down to only 2 seats, and the NDP, or the official opposition, around 8 or 9. They're all in the city of Halifax. So there is that divide. The
Yeah.
NDP, I don't see them growing outside of that. And I'll tell my friends in Nova Scotia anytime, your opponent is still the Liberal Party, even though they only have 2 seats, because they can win in those rural areas. They can bounce back and win in the urban ones as well. So
Right.
there is a thing there with that.
Yeah. You mentioned all the success that's happened provincially. Are there lessons there for the next federal campaign from how people are being successful in Ontario, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island?
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's incredibly hard in this day of age to have message specific or regional specific messages where you can kind of speak to maritime voters differently than you would in Ontario or Alberta. But if
Right.
you could do that, that could be a way to do it, to have the right, talk about their issues that are impacting them. Now, affordability, crime is everywhere, but how do you message it that resonates better with them? But it's when you get into other issues sometimes that makes them uncomfortable in certain regions, right? There doesn't apply as much. If pipelines is important, and I know a lot of Nova Scotians who would benefit from pipelines in Alberta, I know across the country, but it's not a top of mind issue. And if you're focusing a lot of that type of messaging, you sometimes miss the point.
So, faithful listeners will by now have heard me say that if you have something, it probably made its way to you by train. That statement is now in the "if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times" category, because it's true. The last few miles, though, are another matter. That part of the trip often happens by truck. And yes, our sponsor CN is in the trucking business too. The fact is, CN ships door to door, from loading dock to destination. Here's how it works. Say you have a shipment to move: food, manufactured goods, raw materials, whatever. CN will dispatch a vehicle from its dedicated truck division, CNTL, to you. It will also supply the appropriate container for your cargo. The CN truck will move your container to the nearest intermodal terminal. That's the name for specialized containers, and load it onto the train. Same story at the other end. The container arrives, is picked up by another CN truck, and is delivered to the customer or to a sea vessel for further journey. It works in sync, optimized by CN technology. Simple, integrated, smooth, and worry-free. No juggling different carriers or chasing tracking updates, and it all happens under rigorous security. CN provides layered security, meaning surveillance, secure terminals, and advanced monitoring. From any point in Canada, the US, or Mexico to any other point on the continent. No hassles, no handoffs, no surprises, door to door, and CN moves cargo on time. Count on it. One of the things about the the conservative rural part of and just to get into it, this is the part of the party that it is suspected is preventing Poilievre from giving full voice to the uh, anger that many Canadians feel about the United States and about Donald Trump right now. And so there's that wing of the party that continually is an issue, both internally in terms of management, and you've dealt with it both in terms of winning a leadership campaign and in terms of how to manage that coalition through an election, etc. So let me just say that the oftentimes, and say 2025 is a really good example, the Liberal Party can move pretty far to the center, away from the NDP and the left, and still get those votes. because those votes are disciplined by fear of the alternative. Okay? So New Democrats in mass numbers voted for urban New Democrats, I would suggest, mostly voted en masse for a very centrist, some, certainly a Martin liberal, if not a PC, conservative leader because they were afraid of Poilievre, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't the same thing true? Why wasn't that group of people so afraid of Justin Trudeau winning that they would have supported a watered down Conservative Party?
You're gonna have to unpack that a bit clearer for me.
So like it's generally like, I mean, I watching the Poilievre move, it felt like they said, we're going to get those votes and we're going to motivate those votes. And so they appealed to them, and they stopped themselves from saying things like attacking Trump because those voters liked Trump. And so they felt they needed to give those people, they needed not to offend those people. Right. So in the way that Carney was going out and saying, screw the carbon tax and metaphorically screw climate change, and the Democrats still vote for him. Right. How come if Poilievre had been laying the boots to Trump, those group of voters on the right wouldn't have stuck with the Conservatives just to beat the Liberals?
Right. I think they would have. I think they could have done that. Now, what he would have said against Trump, I don't know. Would he have looked credible, and what's the actual messaging? I think they could have done that and should have done that. I think they should have talked about the number one issue Canadians were concerned about in the last election. When going into that election, they were still running carbon tax Carney ads, reminding everyone that he got rid of the carbon tax. So
Right.
double whammy. One, you're reinforcing that he did something that you wanted. And second, not talking about the top issues. No, I absolutely think they could have done that. I don't know the exact strategy they were using, except for it looked like they felt they needed to stay the course for what they charted and what had been working for 2 years, and just weren't able to be nimble enough on that and make the adjustments. It was working for them. Record polling, record money, and they felt Trudeau was the enemy, I guess. And if you can tie Carney to Trudeau and make people think that, then maybe you have a path. So I do believe if they go at Trump in some way, and I again don't know the exact wording or messaging, but if they get on that battlefield and at least alleviate the fear of people who are fired up about this and think that Carney is the only person who can do it, can take it on, I think there is a path for them to win on this.
Right. So you think in the right circumstances, you don't have to cater to that extreme group of the party. You can count on them in large numbers to to support the party, for the purpose of getting rid of the Liberals, which is, I mean, a big advantage if you know that you've got that in your pocket and you can go hunting for votes elsewhere.
Yeah, again, it comes down to what actual language did you land on that you're using that doesn't offend too many. What kind of policies are you pushing for? But in that election, people were riled up and very, very afraid of what was happening down south.
Yeah, totally. Ontario is at a turning point. Huge investments in nuclear and clean energy are creating a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform our energy and manufacturing sectors into a global powerhouse. And Bruce Power is right at the center of it. By adding up to 4,800 megawatts of new nuclear generation to its existing site, the Bruce C project will help position Canada as a global leader in energy and manufacturing while supporting jobs and economic growth here at home. Find out how Bruce Power is powering progress at brucepower.com. Hey, there's going to be the potential for a couple of big events that I don't think are really getting thought enough about in Canada, and that is the potential for referendums in both Alberta and Quebec in the next short period of time. It looks like one will happen in Alberta for sure, and you can't take anything for granted in Quebec, but it does look like the PQ are the odds-on favorites to win the next election, and they have an ironclad commitment to hold a referendum. In neither jurisdiction does it look like a majority of the people want to separate, but as we both know, when you have an election, you don't know what's going to happen at the end of that election, right? and you don't know what issues it's necessarily going to turn on, and etc. So, let's start with Alberta, because it is particularly challenging to me to try to conceptualize how the Canadian side of the Alberta referendum will be run. We've had two referendums in this country, both in Quebec, and in both cases, they were kind of Liberal Party operations. The Liberal Party was in power federally, and the Liberal Party provincially led the charge. With the exception in 1995 of, I believe that Jean Charest was still the leader of the PC party federally, and he was really the lead Canadian campaigner in the 95 referendum. But in both cases, you had a sophisticated political party, because back in those days, the Quebec Liberal Party was still strong in almost all parts of the province. So for the basic blocking and tackling of identifying vote and getting vote out, you had an organization to do that. And then there were local champions to speak for Canada. In 1980, Pierre Trudeau himself could go into Quebec, deliver a speech, change the dynamic of the referendum campaign. And in 95, Charest was extraordinarily memorable with his passport and an emotional plea to Quebecers. So let's go to Alberta. What's that organization that is the base of the campaign? And who are the faces of that campaign, right? Who convinces Albertans? It has to be Albertans themselves, right? Who convinces Albertans? Who's the leader of it? It's not going to be the premier, it doesn't look like.
Right. So I don't know. It's a very good question of what's, who's going to go out there and be in the very front. I believe, I think you'll see a lot of members of parliament and MLAs and all that out there doing it, but who's the actual top spokesperson leader? And maybe Daniel Smith will become that person. We'll see as we get closer to that. I don't know where it'll be, but it's also on the flip side though, it's not like you had the Bouchard and the Parti Québécois, you had those, and Remy Levesque, and who's on the other side, though? Who's on the anti-Canada side? It's mostly a lot of fringe players, not well-known or overly successful electoral people. No one is elected anywhere right now to any seat that will be champion separation. So.
Right.
It goes both ways, but I do think the pro-Canada side, we'll get those people and you'll see some names. Jason Kenney is a name as a former premier. I think you'll see a lot of, and the Conservative caucus and folks like that. I think you'll see someone will rise up and be the front and center of it, or at least I would hope so. But one thing that scares me about this is looking at the polling of it this morning. It's like 29% right now. Or 30% is interested in separating. And that's very similar to 1994 numbers in Quebec, which of course ended up at 49.5 or 9.
Yeah.
49.
49.5, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, as you said earlier, campaigns matter. And, if there's any infrastructure being built, I hope it's being built now on the pro-Canada side.
I was watching this last week, and I was wondering whether Stephen Harper might not lead the pro-Canada forces in
Right.
Alberta.
Oh, that would be, yeah, that's the obvious right there, given what he's been doing just last week and what he's been saying. You're right. That's the name that would very likely pop up, and I know he has it in him.
It'd be so good for the country if he and the Prime Minister were able to work together that way on something like that. Quebec's going to be another matter. I don't know where that's going to come from.
There's also the big change in, like, 1995 was the last one. We now have the social media age. We now have ways to mass communicate. We now have two provinces maybe going at similar times. We now have easier ways for others to influence our elections, not even just Quebecers and Albertans, but people from all over Canada, but also
there'll be massive disinformation too.
Could be incredible. The outside foreign interference, and again, just the way it's so easy to communicate with people now and to push stuff. It's going to be an entirely different ball game than 95, and very scary.
Yeah. So, where do you think the federal party should land on those two referendums in terms of their participation? I mean, from a liberal eye, and this is what separates us, because to me, as a liberal, this was obvious. that if Poilievre were to pick up the mantle of champion of Canada in Alberta, that he could solve a lot of his Trump problem at the same time. That it would be a way for him to look like a Canadian patriot in a way that he's not been able to look like one since the
Yeah.
emergence of Trump.
Another great, yeah, to be fair, I completely forgot he was an Alberta MP. And even if he wasn't, he obviously has deep roots there, having been educated there and grown up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an excellent opportunity for Poilievre. Obviously, it's not an opportunity he wants. I'm sure he doesn't want a referendum, but that is
Right.
something that he could step into as well, and really champion the cause and put his organizational muscle behind it as well on the Pro
Right.
Canada Fund. So that, yeah, that could absolutely be something that we see.
And you don't think they should worry about the fact that some percentage of their vote will have been separate. Some percentage of their federal vote will
Are
have
you,
been separatists.
yeah, but are you pro Canada or not?
Right.
There is no choice, and I'm quite sure Pierre Poilievre is very pro Canada. So absolutely, there's no look. If any leader has to pause and think, am I upsetting too many of my voting coalition to save my country? Then you're not a leader that should be in any position in our country at the federal level.
While oil pipeline debates dominate headlines, a quieter export success story has been unfolding for years. On BC's northwest coast, our sponsor AltaGas and joint venture partner Vopak are putting their proven export playbook to work, powered by Canadian propane. In 2019, AltaGas made what didn't exist a reality, connecting Canadian propane to Asian markets via the port of Prince Rupert. With certainty from the federal government and the Prince Rupert Port Authority, AltaGas and Vopak started Canada's first export port for propane, the Ridley Island Propane Export Terminal, or RIPET. What AltaGas has built with RIPET and continues to build with the Ridley Island Energy Export Facility, or REEF, is a modern export playbook grounded in four essential elements. 1. Sell something the world wants. 2. Invest in infrastructure to reach tidewater. 3. Establish a framework that enables investment. And 4. Work with the right partners. To learn more about AltaGas's Canadian success story, visit westcoastadvantage.ca. All right, let's focus on the Liberals for a bit here. And what is the again, having just hung around with Conservatives all across the country for 2 weeks, what's the basic critique of the Carney government and the Liberals? What's wrong with it?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily what's wrong, but what the perception is, or what the opportunity to poke at it is, that it's been in power for almost a year and hasn't gotten a lot done.
Right.
Lot of speeches, a lot of good statements, but only one bill's passed the House of Commons. What's getting built, what's actually getting to market, and are they going far enough? They did the MOU with Alberta, but what else? There's still a lot of other blockages there to get things moving. So I think that's the criticism, but it is tricky. He's moved the party drastically to the middle, and he's undoing much of Trudeau's legacy, the carbon tax, the EV mandates last week. Like, there's a number of things that he is doing that's trickier to poke holes at. But affordability is still a problem, crime still a problem, and things aren't getting built, which he's promised to do. And what I advise right after the last election is give the Liberals as much rope as they can hang themselves with right now, get out of their way, and let's see what they can get done. And if they succeed and do things for this country and get things built, that's great. But if they don't, then we point to it and we show how they failed and we take them down on that.
Right. Right. So what do you think some of those tests are going to be? Is it a pipeline, for example? Do you think that a pipeline is a sine qua non?
I think that's way too far off, right? There's a lot of I think the economy is going to be the ultimate test. We're talking about what's built and what's built. I don't actually know if things are shovels in the ground somewhere. I'm not watching. I don't know what's happening on that. Are we going into?
Well, neither you nor I know, and so
Right.
either they're not on the ground or it's a terrible failure of the government's part. So,
Right.
right.
Another issue is communications.
Yeah.
But I think it's like, what is going to be the state of the country in the next election, or the next election? If we're a year or so out,
Yeah.
are we still dealing with Trump? Is affordability gone up even higher? Is crime still out of control? Like, there's going to be things that advantages the Conservative Party if things aren't done. For the Liberals, they have to feel like a safe choice, like they were last year. If they're not a safe choice, if they don't feel like, if are we better off with Carney? Did he succeed in what he said he was going to do, or in anything? I think will be the measure of where they're judged in the next election.
Right. I see some fighting on social media about what the actual mandate of the Carney government was, and I see people trying to say that his mandate was to get a deal with Trump. That he said that he was the guy that could get a deal with Trump, and he's failed to get a deal with Trump. Do you think that's the basis on which people are judging him?
No, I think it's deal with Trump, not get a deal with Trump. I think it's how does he deal with the threat that we have down south, and how does he get the economy turned around? How does he get products to market? I think that's what my sense is of what and why voters went to the Liberal Party in the last election is
Right.
to deal with Trump's, and that's where I think where the Conservatives need to get at least on that playing field to show that, yeah, they can deal with them. May not win that battle against Carney, but it could at least alleviate some fears and draw enough votes either to them or at least away from the Liberal Party.
Right. Right. And the Trump thing, do you think Carney has the right balance on that? Or do you think, I mean, there certainly are times when I don't think he's giving Canadians the psychic satisfaction they want out of the Trump thing, because I mean, sometimes he talks a little tough, but other times he goes down there and the schmooze and nothing happens. So uh, I wonder whether the Canadians who wanted him to stand up to Trump are feeling. Uh, I mean, the polls say that they're satisfied, but whether or not they're really getting what they wanted out of that, I don't know. And he can't give them what they want, I don't think.
Yeah, look, he's dealing with an incredibly difficult person to deal with. Every time I've seen Carney down there, though, Trump in person doesn't seem to insult him at all. Doesn't seem to. He seems. I don't know if it's Carney's resume that has Trump a bit enamored by him or what it is, but they seem to have something that works. But we don't have a deal of any sort. Things are not seem to be on any path towards that, so it's
Right.
problematic. But no, I don't. I don't think. Again, I don't think Canadians were, expecting him to get tough with Trump. I think they want him to just again deal with Trump. And right now, he's kind of dealing with him in some ways. But again, it's going to be how does it start impacting us? When are more and more jobs lost? Do price on food and fuel go up? When do those things happen? And if they do, then Carney's vulnerable.
Right. One of the things I thought really put Poilievre in very strong position was that he anticipated inflation. And economists can argue about whether or not he had the correct economic factors diagnosed. Doesn't matter. He said it was going to happen when other people said it won't happen, and
Mhm.
it did happen. And then those people said, "Oh, it's just going to be here for a couple of days. It's transitory." And he said, "Bullshit," and he was right again. Right. Um, so at that point, he wasn't just the alternative. He was a guy who looked like he understood some important things and probably understood how to fix them. Right.
Mhm.
Um, I think he's going to kind of find that again in a new way.
For sure. He was, yeah, look, I was the national campaign manager when he first started talking about inflation. When it wasn't on the radar, people weren't feeling it, and it wasn't a great time to communicate it. But he was bang on, and it became a very hot issue in Flashpoint. So, yeah, the problem with predicting right now too is like, is the election next month or next year? And the issue sets could be very different. And whatever, we talk about inflation being an issue then. What is the top issue a year from now? And where's it going to go? And he's got it, all parties need to try to figure out where that'll be and prepare for that. And if the election again is this spring, then Trump and tariffs is the top issue, and if he can find a way to get into that conversation and keep his coalition strong as it is, and it's fired up, and either help eat some liberal vote or have some drift to the other sides. But what's the next big issue other than that? I don't think any of us know what it is.
Good news, Herle Burly-ites. Fidelity Investments Canada is back as a sponsor of the pod. Why? Because Fidelity believes that informed public dialogue matters. And the Herle Burly is where important conversations are happening about Canada's future, our economy, our institutions, and yes, Canadians' financial well-being. Over the next 10 episodes, Fidelity will share with us their insights and research about finances and investing. So, as a refresher, who is Fidelity Investments Canada? For nearly 4 decades, Fidelity has been helping Canadians achieve their financial goals. That amounts to more than 2 million retail investors trusting Fidelity to deliver strong, long-term performance. Not only that, Fidelity also believes in strengthening the communities where we live and work. In 2025 alone, the company earned 19 employer awards, and since 1987 has supported nearly 2,000 charities across Canada through employee giving and corporate philanthropy. Stay tuned next episode for more insights. In the meantime, follow Fidelity Canada on LinkedIn, Instagram, Reddit, and YouTube for more. But how can there be an election between now and the next American election in which Trump doesn't figure very, very prominently? I mean, I only expect things to get crazier. I mean, he's probably going to get smashed in the vote in the midterms. And then how does an autocrat react to that? We're going to see, right? How does he react to that? And it could be double down on the crazy, right? And so I just think that situation is going to get more difficult before it gets any better, if it gets any better at all. This might be the most quiet time on the Trump bandwagon to go, but I don't sense that the Conservatives want an election this spring.
No, I definitely don't think so. It does not. It's not good for them, and definitely doesn't. I don't think it'd be good for the country to go right now. And you saw it last week where the Conservatives started. You started seeing more cooperation. There was the GST cut that they announced that they would help support. And going back to what I said earlier, where only one bill is passed, I think the Conservatives need to look at this and realize, the Liberals, if they do go, they will likely get a very big win, and. I don't think the Liberals would want to necessarily go because it's risky, as we said. It's so volatile. You can lose an election as well, despite where the polls are. Things can flip. But
they have no reason for one right now.
They do, yeah.
They don't have no public justification.
No, other than the polling. No justification, but they have the polling numbers to do it if they're, the selfish call, which works sometimes, or you could do it. And people a day or two into the campaign will talk about why we're here. But if you have a good narrative and saying you can still plow through that. But if I'm the Conservatives, I'm, go and look for the bills you agree with that the government wants to get through and negotiate them, make changes and say, we'll support this if you change this, or we'll get this through because Canadians need it. Show leadership on that. And I think that actually helps with the Trump tariff thing. It shows that you're a part of Team Canada,
right?
Without necessarily, going too far on it.
Right. I definitely don't think you'd want to give any wind to the obstruction sales, right? That you don't want to give Carney any ability to say that he needs an election in order to get a mandate.
You don't,
right now.
You don't want to give him the communication tool, but also just the feeling he has to go. Like if Carney, again, I think when you're prime minister, even if it's a minority government, you're still prime minister. You still get to govern, and you'd rather do that for a year than go to the polls. But if nothing can get through the House, if the Bloc and the Conservatives who control the committees block everything, then what is the point of this government? Then they have to go to the polls essentially if nothing's going through. So I think there's opportunity to find common ground on different things, and I would hope the Conservatives do that, and I hope the Liberals also are honest and take it. Right, the Liberals could play games here and just keep saying things are being obstructed, and then try to engineer an election because we still have a budget that has not actually passed. No one's actually put the budget yet. There was a motion in the fall but the actual bill. That has not gone through. So if things could still happen, we could still end up in a snap election.
Affordability and crime, right? Is there a third leg that you think? By the way, just to close up on something, I'm surprised you don't think that the Liberals fucked up the early election call against you and Erin O'Toole in 2021.
I do believe that.
Yeah,
because they didn't have a narrative. They didn't have a story to tell. If
at
you have a
all.
story to tell,
Right,
they didn't. They went 2, 3 weeks in without not telling us why they called an election.
right.
What they
So they
should
had
have done.
they had majority numbers when they called it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. They
But they
called it.
pissed that away.
Right, with no story, no actual planning. If they had they could have mapped something out. They could have sat down with all three. Well, I was waiting for the call. I was waiting to get a call saying they wanted Erin to meet with the Prime Minister, Erin O'Toole, to talk about something. And then they come out and Erin and Trudeau says, "Oh, we found no common ground. We have to go to the polls." Like something, and they never did that. I think Carney, if he could just say, things are being obstructed, nothing's happening. Again, not saying it's true, but that's a story he could try to tell, and that's why we need an election.
Right. But it kind of has to be visible in the House, right? And because like committees, nobody knows what's going on at the committees. You can never convince anybody about the committees.
Right.
Right.
Right. But you can still, again, it don't have to show it. You just have to say it. You just say that, this is why we're calling an election. Instead of, I believe in 21, the Liberal line was Canadians should have a choice. Well, it's not like to what?
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
But I think the same thing would happen to them now if they called it, to be honest. I would be very leery if I was them of doing it, because I think the only argument they have is obstruction. And I don't think it looks to Canadians like the government is being obstructed. I think it looks like Carney's running the joint and he's doing what he wants to do. And, if he was to say, my God, I'm really hamstrung, I think people would be surprised by that.
Yeah, and that's why I think, we're going to get to a point soon where you're going to start seeing legislation getting through where the opposition parties, and again, it was on the government to figure this out for the last year. And all of they've not been making friends in the House other than a few floor crossers here and there, but they haven't been working with the other parties at all. And I keep hearing, like in the fall, we kept hearing how, the opposition parties are obstructing, they're not doing something. It's on the government. It's their responsibility to find partners to get their legislation through. And I think that presents an opportunity for the Conservatives to actually, okay, you guys haven't been doing this. We're going to step up and we're going to start looking at stuff and try to get it passed because Canadians need these things. And we'll try to get amended, and where we can, we'll try to find common ground somewhere and then try to take credit for it. Instead of, go back to the carbon tax mistake. Pierre Poilievre made carbon tax a bad word in this country. Before that, it was not where it was. Like he just drilled it down and it became the biggest boogeyman. And Carney, first day, wipes it out. And instead of going on a victory tour saying, like if I was Poilievre and those guys, I'd be claiming victory right there and just
Laughing at them.
Yeah.
Laughing at them. So look how desperate they are.
Yeah, and they're done.
Right.
Instead, we went into this complicated, well, actually, there's an industrial carbon tax. And if you look at this formula over here, it just didn't work.
No.
There was a missed opportunity. So I think we could actually learn from that and do some things now.
Right. Every politician has flaws. You've been watching Carney for a year now. What about him do you think is not going to wear well?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing it seems to be is actual inexperience in the politics. That's what I would have said for maybe the last 8 or 9 months, but he does have some floor crossers, so something's happening. He is figuring some things out. And they've been doing some interesting things in the last few weeks. The Davos speech really stood out. So his political inexperience, I think, was his weakest point, but he seems to be improving on that tremendously. So this, the Carney from the last election, and that's another thing I point out regularly how in the last election, the last week or so, Poilievre won that last week. He out-campaigned Carney, where Trump disappeared. But if we go into that next election thinking that's the same Carney we were campaigning against, that would be a mistake as well, because I think he has figured out the game of politics a lot quicker than some may think.
Right. Right. Do you think though that he can get into the game that of affordability or crime? Like, do you think they can?
So it's so hard.
It's very difficult for the government to get into it, and he doesn't look the part on those issues the way he looks the part on the foreign policy Trump stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's looking at Mark Carney when he ran and won, people didn't know who he was, but his resume was amazing. Central banker for 2 G7 countries, one of them being our own, and CEO of some firm called Brookfield that no one's really heard of, but sounds really important, and Goldman Sachs. Like that's like an incredible resume that fit the time of where we are. But affordability and crime, it doesn't seem authentic to him or top issues to him. And also at the same time, this is their Liberals' fourth mandate. Hard to say, okay, now we're going to get tough on crime. Now we're going to address affordability. The Trump thing is new, and they could look at that as they're a new team to take it on.
Yeah.
But, going into the next election, the fifth mandate's the hardest.
I would have. That was certainly my experience. Uh, um, we've been talking about crime and affordability, but there's one issue that we've left off the table, and that was I think, a big part of it, and that was immigration.
Hmm.
And a sense in the country that the previous government or the Liberals had gotten way out over their skis and allowed far too many people in. It had impacted on housing prices. It had impacted on availability of health care. It had impacted on inflation, and it was impacting on everything that was negative for people. Um, and some people say that the consensus in Canada on immigration, there was a bipartisan consensus, and now it's been broken. Do you think that's right?
I don't know if it's been broken. I think, well, I shouldn't say I don't know where the Liberals really stand on it now. I mean, they seem to be trying to reduce a lot of the numbers. I would say the views on immigration has changed where, we are a place of refuge, a place to bring new Canadians in. But were we making sure they had jobs? Were we making sure they had places to live? And I think that's where the immigration breakdown is, and that was the problem. So I don't know if the consensus is truly broken unless the Liberals still think we should be bringing in all these new people with no place to live and no place to work. And I hope that's
Right.
not what they're doing.
Right.
And I think that seems to be still where, that's the conservative view from everything I've seen. We are a country that needs growth, and we need to bring in new people, and we also need to be a place for of refuge. But it was the way it was done in the previous government that was just seemed without a plan, haphazard, and led to the situation we're in, where people, we have these immigrants coming here with no place to live and no jobs, and that's not fair to them. They're coming for a new life to bring their family here. So I don't think the consensus is broken necessarily. I think it just the issue needs to be fixed, and we need to do a better job and be more responsible when we're bringing new people in, so that they can get the best start.
Right. Job is one thing, and a house to live in is another thing. Um, I don't want to get into Kelly Leach territory, but um, is there any role, like, what is the role of socialization? Like, how do newcomers to Canada figure out what this country's been about, represented, stood for, um, what we believe? I'm not saying they necessarily have to believe those things. Everybody who comes in has their own views and changes the country, but they should know a little bit about it. Do we do a good enough job of that? Do you have any idea?
I don't know. I don't know enough on that. I know when Jason Kenney was minister, they brought in different tests and education to teach about our history and our shared history. But I'm not sure what the systems are in place for that. But I would hope.
Right.
I think all
Because it's one of the
parties.
concerns I've heard about all the people that came in is, geez, did it actually change the country? Was it so many at one time? Um,
And it could,
uh,
regardless of if you bring in so many in one time without a plan in terms of, you're not just bringing them in, you're bringing them in a tough situation
mm,
where things are so expensive. Like affordability and crime impacts them too. So it's hard to learn a country's history when you're struggling right out of the gate as soon as you enter it.
right, right. So listen, are you still in the campaign management business? Do you have another campaign in you?
Of course, I'm not managing a campaign. I don't know if I have that in me, but certainly being involved and being an advisor. I see him every few months.
Those are a dime a dozen. In fact, when you're the campaign manager, you hate those people. Those are people you have to manage.
Right, 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 right. No, look, the phone's still ringing, which is nice, but you know, the last campaign I managed was the national general election in 21, and that
Right.
took a lot out of me.
Mhm.
But I'm back involved in campaigns. I, obviously just did Prince Edward Island, where I helped Rob Lance become premier. Did Ontario last year with Corey. I was there for the campaign, and did mayoral ones in Halifax. So still doing them, and I will get more and more, I think, as I get out of the 21, put that behind me more. You know what it's like losing is at that level is devastating, and takes its toll. But no, I love campaigns. To me, it's Saturday. I was in Charlottetown when Lance won, and it's like my Super Bowl, right? Like you're there, you're part of the team, and you're cheering it on, and nothing beats that feeling. So I love campaigns from that perspective, and I've got the love back. So yeah, I'll be doing more and more. But managing, I mean, I don't know what it's like for you, but when I manage a campaign, it is 24/7. It is my I don't like I've got blinders on, and that's all I see. And
Yep.
at my age, and with 4 young kids and a wife, and a firm that I'm growing, just it's not on. So
Right. Well, maybe though, and you're involved in the provincial side. Maybe all that will add up to some learnings at the federal level. I certainly think that Liberal wins in Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, and in Ontario and BC, leading up to 2015, taught the federal Liberals where the sweet spot was.
right.
Right. So maybe they'll get to watch and learn a little bit from you and your colleagues at the provincial level.
Well,
Fred,
look,
thanks.
yeah, sorry, just lots of friends at the federal party who I talk to regularly, and I think they are, they're figuring out that path, and we'll see if they can get on it and stay on it.
Yeah. Um, well, Outhouse seems like he gets it, to be honest. We had a good conversation when he was on here. I presume that he and you were in some contact. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Thanks for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, Fred is replacing Corey tonight as our new panelist on The Curse of Politics. So I look forward to seeing you next Monday as well. Back on The Curse. Enjoyed
Looking
today, our
forward
first
to it.
day. Yeah. Thanks.
All right.
Take care, my friend. See you then.
All right.
I'd like to thank everybody who sponsored this podcast and all of you Herle Burly-ites out there who watched and listened to our conversation with Fred DeLorey today. Long time, even though he's a young man, long time conservative campaign manager, and lots more left in him, as we just heard. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week with more of the Herle Burly, and there will be lots of Fred DeLorey content on Air Quotes Media. Just watch.
Herle Burly.